if you don't know that movie clip, it's from the movie Mission to Mars. And that might seem like science fiction, and it sort of is. But those evolutionary theorists who are at least intellectually honest have come up with other theories as how to explain where we all came from. How did life come about on the earth and things like that. And that is one of their theories, that alien intelligent life started evolution here on this planet. And if you think about it, what that does is you don't have to answer to God as the designer. There's somebody out there who maybe we'll find someday, but we don't know, so we don't have to really worry about it until they find us or we find them. It's a way of kicking the can down the road and not addressing the real issue. That's what happens when the data does not meet or match evolutionary theory. You got to explain why it doesn't match it, and this is one of the ways they do it. Since science cannot explain the evidence of intelligent design, this is what they do, right? They spin the facts. In the same way the news spins the facts to fit their agenda, so does science, or at least the majority of those who practice science. The reason science and those who practice science do this is because they do not want to answer to God. That is the real issue. So they try to explain him away. However, as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, we can explain that explosion of life that was mentioned in the movie clip, that we see in the fossil record. And we would say that is evidence of special creation by our God, the Creator, and the one, obviously, the God of the Bible. Well, today we are going to see how God created the animal life in Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 20. So please turn in your Bibles or turn them on to Genesis chapter 1, verse 20. As always, I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have. You can text those in and we'll address those at the end. So Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 20, this is what Moses recorded for us. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Father, as we approach this text, I pray that you would give us guidance, that you would instruct us, that you would lead us in the truth, that we might understand it and apply it correctly. We pray in your Son's name. Amen. Well, here's the real reason as to why evolutionary theory and the scientists who adopt that view of where we all came from, here's the real reason why they don't accept the Genesis record. And it is found in Romans chapter 1. And go to the slide, go to the next slide. Yeah, go there. I'll try to redo mine. So here's what it says. "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, meaning God, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made." Do you see that? What has been made is meant to teach us and direct us toward the fact of God and his character, so that they, meaning everyone, are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. creation is meant to teach us that God made everything, including every form of life. Well, today we're going to discuss day 5 and half of day 6. We'll get into the human race next week. And we learned that on day 5, God created the sea animals and the birds. That's not working for me, so you're going to go to the next slide. God, the creation of the sea animals and the birds. So, we read that beginning in verse 20. As he did in the previous 4 days, God here spoke creation into existence out of nothing. The text literally reads, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures." That's what the original says. It's a literary device known as a paronomasia, basically a play on words. The sea creatures that we see that are mentioned in verse 20 would have included everything from plankton to fish to whales to sea turtles to sharks to clams to shrimp to lobsters, sea snails, and everything that lives in the water, including, we believe, those that live in fresh water. This was as we've seen already in the Genesis record, a massive act of God's creative power and His genius in His design in the animal life of the water, and also as well as the birds, which we will address here in a moment. I want to direct your attention, though, to the phrase living creatures. You see that word living? It's the first time we see it in the Genesis record. It is the Hebrew word nephesh. It simply is the idea that God creates a breathing creature, animate, we would call it life. Instead of inanimate life, which was the vegetation or the plant life, this is animate life, that which breathes, that which is alive in a way that no other thing is. That word nephesh is only used to describe either animals or human beings, never plant life. And so, at the same time, when he creates the sea life, also he creates all the birds that fly in the sky or in the expanse of the heavens. Every size and kind of bird were created like the sea animals in an instant. This includes every hawk, geese, or at least the first ones, ducks, chickens, finches, sparrows, vultures, and every other kind of bird. Also, notice how, according to the biblical record, the birds were created before the land animals on day 4. And if you've ever studied this issue, you know that's significant because evolutionary theory teaches that birds evolved from land animals, more specifically dinosaurs. However, that's not true according to the biblical record. We then learned that among the sea creatures in verse 21 are these what Moses identifies as the great sea monsters. The Hebrew word there is tanin, and it is translated in other portions of the scripture as dragon, such as in Isaiah 51 and Psalm 74. Of the sea monsters that we know of, this would have included the sharks, the whales, giant squid, and every other large creature that we find in the ocean. We also know from the fossil record that at least at one time there also existed other sea monsters which would have been created at this same time, what we identify as aquatic dinosaurs, meaning dinosaurs who live in the water. They would have been created on day 4. They would have been included in this phrase, God created the great sea monsters and every creature that moves. In fact, it seems that the Bible mentions one such aquatic dinosaur called Leviathan. Go to the next slide. So it begs the question, was Leviathan what we call a plesiosaur? Now, a plesiosaur is a type of swimming dinosaur, aquatic dinosaur. Listen to Isaiah 27 verse 1. The context here is of judgment, but listen to the animal that is referenced. In that day, Yahweh will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. Could it be, leave it on that slide for now, could it be that Leviathan is what we know as a plesiosaur, or possibly even a plesiosaur, that we read about in the Scriptures? In fact, turning your Bibles to Job 41, there is a whole chapter about this particular animal. Job 41, and I find it fascinating that you chose to read out of Job today for our prayer time, Jeff, because not only we're going to look at Job now, we're going to look at it at the end. I love how God always puts this together. But Job 41, listen to Job 41. We're not going to read all of it because it's the whole chapter, but I want to identify some things of Job 41. Here is God questioning Job, and he says, can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? The implication meaning that Leviathan lives in the water. Or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you make a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you, or will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? The idea being, are you able to tame him? Will you control him? Look at verse 7. Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. In other words, if you do that, it's not going, that's going to be the last time you do anything. Behold, your expectation is false. You will be laid low, even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that it can stand before him? Look at this. Look at verse 15. His strong scales are his pride. What in the world in the water has scales? Nothing that we now know of, right? Look what else it says. Shut up as a tight seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them, meaning his scales. They are joined to one another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. Listen to this, verse 18. He sneezes, flash forth light, and his eyes are like eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth out of his nostrils. Smoke goes forth as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and his flame goes forth from his mouth. And you could read the rest of it. It's possibly a plesiosaur. There's even some reference to the fact that it can breathe fire or something along those lines. Well, here's a picture of a plesiosaur. If it was Leviathan, you see these are some artist renditions of what we think it may have looked like. Whether or not Leviathan is a plesiosaur or its, cousin, the plesiosaur, or maybe something else. It was a fishing reptile, what we would know as an aquatic dinosaur. It's fascinating thing about this particular animal, which would have been created on day 4. One of the best fossils we have found is in Dorset, England. It was, get this, a skull of a plesiosaur, this type of an animal, that was 8 feet long. It's a huge skull. They estimate that this plesiosaur would have been about 54 feet in length and weighed anywhere from 7 to 13 tons. That is 14,000 to 26,000 pounds. That's a huge animal, enormous. So it's possible that this is what is the Leviathan, or maybe it's another animal, but this animal would have been created on day 4. By the way, we believe it's extinct because we find it in the fossil record. We have not found them alive, but let's be honest, the ocean is so large, it possibly could still exist. If you've ever, one of the things I like to do when I can't sleep, I'll watch things on YouTube, and one of the things that fascinate me is clips and evidence like, is the megalodon still alive? And, there's all these things that, but one of the fascinating things is this huge great white shark, I think it was 9 feet or maybe even a bit longer, that they tagged to just track its, movement through the ocean. And they lost track of it, but the tracker, came up on the shore, and they found it. They took the data from it, and they discovered that this tracker, went down, thousands of feet in the water like really quick, and didn't get colder, it got warmer. And so it was in the belly. Someone ate this huge great white shark and took it down to the deep, and then we found the evidence of it later. We don't know what animal it was. Some people think it was megalodon. Could have been a plesiosaur. We don't know. We don't know. Well, going back to the text, notice the mention of kinds. We saw this word last week in day 3 when it referred to the kinds of plant or vegetation, the types of plant life. Here it refers to the animals. And what we know of, that what we have observed in the natural order of creation that God has created, is that kinds do not evolve into other kinds. You go to that next slide. Kinds do not evolve into other kinds. Now, after all I have said about evolutionary theory not being fact, it may shock you to hear me say that there is such a thing as evolution. Here's what I mean. There are 2 types of evolution, and there is a difference between them. There is what is called macroevolution, meaning types or kinds of animals changing or evolving into other types of animals. That type of evolution is not true. There's no evidence of that. But there is what we call microevolution. And microevolution is simply what we see when different, one kind of animal can have different varieties, right? So we don't see a bird evolving from a dinosaur, nor do we see a fish turning into a dog. But what we do see is that there are a variety of different types of the same kind. There are different types of dogs, ones with long hair, short hair, different sizes, different types of cats and horses, and there are scientific names for these kinds. The horses are the equines, and the cats are the felines and the canines and things like that. But the different types of horses are still horses, right? This phenomenon is also known not only as microevolution, but also referred to sometimes as adaptation or even natural selection, if you like that term. From the Bible's point of view, though, the way we understand that is this means that God designed, if we're talking about horses, the first horses with the genetic code to evolve into different types of horses. It was all there within the first horses, and it was in the genetic code. However, as I have said, kinds never evolve into other kinds. There is no record, no evidence that shrimp evolve into whales or jellyfish into sea turtles. We don't see that, and that would match the biblical record. Also notice, if you go to the next slide, the suitability of the earth for life. The seas, and we believe both the salt water and the fresh water, were able to support the sea life God had created. The same is true of the birds, right? God creates this habitat of the earth and the heavens for these animals to exist. We also see that this, in where God commands them to be fruitful and multiply. God would not have said to fill the earth and multiply if the earth could not support this life that He has just created, right? The earth is suitable for life. God created the earth to support life. There is also, if you've ever studied this, there is a parallel to day 5. Don't go there yet. Don't go to the next slide. We'll get there in a minute. There's also a parallel to day 5 to day 2. On day 2, God creates the waters, right? He separates the waters from the waters, and the waters above the firmament and below the firmament, right? He creates the waters, and He creates the expanse between the waters, or the sky. And on day 5, here He creates the animals to live in those, right? The water and the sky. So there is that parallel too. This then brings us to some more, and then go to the next slide, the inconvenient facts of evolutionary theory that we usually like to address. Here, these, I'd love to spend a lot of time on these, but I can't, but we'll talk about them a little bit. Here's this issue, the first one, the probability of evolving proteins, which is impossible, okay? And if I'll try to put them in layman's terms, basically, proteins are the chemical building blocks of life, okay? That's what proteins are. And essentially, proteins are formed by a very specific strand of what we call amino acids. Think of kind of like a chain, right? And they have to be in a very specific order in order to form the protein. And there's anywhere from maybe about 150 to several hundred amino acids in one single protein. And when they are put in the order that they are meant to be in, the protein folds in upon itself, or the chain does, and it forms this protein, right? And they have to be in the perfect order. Think of it this way. There's, I think, 20 amino acids, and if you assign to them a letter, 20 letters of the alphabet, it could go A, Z, B, B, A, C, C, F, K, in that kind of order. And it's got to be in a very specific order in order to form this protein. The mathematical chances of amino acids perfectly evolving into the correct order to form a protein, which is necessary for life, because of the building blocks of life, are 1 chance in 10 to the 74th power. Now, to give you a little bit of perspective, and if you watch that film, if the documentary that I've been passing out, that's a little like, that'd be like sending a blind person into the Milky Way galaxy trying to identify an atom, something that you can't even see with the naked eye. That's the probability of proteins evolving. In fact, when that came out, that knowledge came out, they blackballed the scientist who came up with that. And they basically just called them a religion. That's all religion. And he's like, wait a minute, I'm just following what we observe. Then there's the fact there are no transitional animals in the fossil record, not one. We don't find shrimp becoming whales. We don't, if a shrimp evolved into a whale, you would expect to find, the shrimp beginning to slowly change over time, and you would have these transitional forms. We don't find any in the fossil record. Darwin himself admitted that if these transitional animals were never found in the fossil record, his theory would be false. Then there's what's known, and this is connected to that, what is known as the Cambrian explosion. It refers to the fully formed animals that we find in the fossil record. And to understand what Cambrian means, it simply means, if I can put it this way, to the rock level, right? It is assumed that as you look at the levels of rock and the crust of the earth, the lower you go, the older it is, and the higher you go, the newer it is, or the younger it is, right? And so in this particular level that they call the Cambrian level, and it's supposed to represent an age of the earth that lasted millions of years, below the Cambrian level, we don't find any fossils. And then all of a sudden, in the Cambrian level, they call it an explosion because there's all this life, all types of life in the fossil record. Aquatic life, land life, and these perfectly formed and functioning animals. There's no transitional animals in the Cambrian level under it. And evolutionary theory cannot answer this phenomenon, but we can. We can. God created all the animals at once, and most of them died together at the flood, and we see a record of it in what they call the Cambrian level, right? Then there's mutated DNA cannot produce different life forms. Now, according to evolutionary theory, this is how life evolved from one form to another through mutation. It is argued that this takes place over long periods of time, right? At the level of DNA, which is the genetic code of life. However, mutated DNA is almost always lethal. In other words, it doesn't better the organism. They have disease or they die. Also, mutation is always the subtraction of genetic information, not addition to it. So they can't answer that. And then last thing is the need for fertilized eggs. Basically, the building plans for living organisms does not, this is fascinating, they have discovered, it doesn't just come from DNA. It also comes from a fertilized egg that was formed by the parents. In other words, if you think about when we build a house, right? When the contractor, if he's worth his salt in what he does and knows his profession, he has a building plan that he lays out, right? And there's an order on which he builds, right? He's got to dig the footing, and then after he compacts the earth and all this thing, but then he starts putting the foundation and then the walls and the plumbing and the electrical, and there's a plan. What we have discovered that DNA, it doesn't just come from DNA. It comes from genetic information passed down by the parents. That means that in order for there to be reproduction, there needs to be adult organisms already fully formed. Evolutionary theory can't answer that. We can. Who made mature adult animals? God. Right? God did. Well, now let's look at day 6. Day 6 of creation. The creation of the land animals. So when we see on day 6, beginning in verse 24, then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, and cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. This happens on day 6. Like I said before, we're going to cover half of day 6, not all of it. We'll get to human beings next week. But this particular day, as we remember the parallel day 2 and 5, there is a parallel between days 3 and 6. Right? Day 3 is when God created both the land for the animals to live on and the vegetation for the animals to feed these animals. And here he creates the animals to live on what he created on day 3. Now, the creation of the land animals, it says, listen to this, let the earth bring forth living creatures, which is an interesting phrase. It's an interesting phrase. We might even say that the creation of the land animals is from the earth. And some speculate that this implies that the land animals were made and are made of the same substance as the earth, which is what we find, right? The chemical makeup of animals we find in the earth, which is why when animals die, when they decay, they absorb back into the earth, which also, if you've ever heard of this practice, if you plant a tree or something on top of a decaying body, it feeds the plant because it goes back to the same chemical composition of what the earth is. And perhaps that's what that means. It is also clear from the text that these land animals, like the sea animals, were all created at the same time on day 6. Now the reason, again, we can say that if you look at the text, look at the list of, first he identifies cattle, creeping things, and beasts after their kind. And then he repeats the list, but it's inverted. Then he says beasts, cattle, and creeping things. In other words, he uses them interchangeably because they were all created at the same time in an instant. Right? There are no land animals that preceded other land animals like evolutionary theory says. They did not evolve from simple to more complex forms of life. They were all created at the same time. Notice the mention of kinds, cattle, creeping things, and beasts. Cattle may, we believe, refer to simply things like domesticated animals, like cows. Again, you got to remember that who the original audience was to Genesis, and it was Israel, right, who had been led out of Egypt in the Exodus. Creeping things we believe, refers to things like insects, snakes, and probably other small animals, and then beasts refer to every other animal. Anywhere from, dinosaurs to tigers to dogs, wolves, hyenas, and even, we believe, dinosaurs. Even dinosaurs. Now, one particular interesting fact is that the animals were vegetarian. If you go to the next slide, all of the animals were vegetarian, right? Look at chapter 1, verse 30. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food, and it was so. So in the beginning, all the animals were vegetarian. That would not last long, but the reason we know that death did not come until Genesis chapter 3, right? Death had not entered into creation yet, but soon would when Adam and Eve sinned in chapter 3, and we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 3. Incidentally, many of the fossils that we have recovered show signs of death, show signs of disease, show signs of animals eating other animals, which means that the animals we find in the fossil record are animals that existed after Genesis 3 when death entered into God's creation. Now, speaking of dinosaurs, which evolutionary theory says did not exist during the same time as humans, there is a mention in Job that appears to be a reference to a dinosaur. And the reason I bring this up is because this is always an issue that the evolutionary theorists bring up. Like, well, what about dinosaurs? What about dinosaurs? Well, let's talk about them then. And so here's this animal mentioned in Job 40 that appears to be a dinosaur. Now, go to Job chapter 40 if you still have your Bible open in chapter 41. Listen to this description of this animal. Job chapter 40, beginning in verse 15. Listen to this. Listen to this animal. Behold now, behemoth, which I made, as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold now his strength in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. See that? The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. And you continue to read. He eats plants. And was behemoth a dinosaur? Some try to identify behemoth as, well, it's probably a hippo. Because later it talks about he's not afraid of the water and the river. And he's at, he can walk through it and wade through it. Oh, it's probably a hippo. When's the last hippo you saw that had a tail like a cedar? Right? Behemoth was probably a dinosaur. In fact, creation scientists speculate that behemoth was one of the what we call sauropod kinds of dinosaurs. Perhaps a brachiosaurus. Here's a picture of one. This is obviously an artist's rendition. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, but Jurassic Park is computer animation. You knew that, right? They're not real. They're not. Okay, just want to make sure you know that. So this is an artist's rendition. Perhaps this was a behemoth. There are different types of sauropods, right? Brachiosaurus is just one of them. There's Brontosaurus and other types of sauropods. But it seems to fit the description. What we can tell from the fossil record is that when the sauropods, when they would walk, when their hind legs, the way their hips are formed, when they would take a step, it would sway their tail, which seems to match what the scripture says about it swaying like a cedar. Now keep in mind, the description that we find in Job of this behemoth is in the context of God questioning Job and telling him, hey, look at behemoth, meaning Job, human beings, were still alive when this creature still roamed the earth. This flies in the face of evolutionary theories, paleontology. However, there is more evidence that the biblical record is right concerning these animals. Consider what kind of other animals we find together with dinosaur fossils. Go to the next slide. Dinosaur fossils and other fossils. In many of the fossil beds that we find dinosaur bones in, we also find bones of other swamp-type animals. In other words, next to the dinosaur bones, we find the bones of creatures such as ducks and turtles and lizards and frogs. This demonstrates that dinosaurs lived on the earth with other animals, which is contrary to evolutionary theory. Furthermore, here are some more inconvenient facts of evolutionary theory. This is a fascinating, in fact, one of the movies we have talks all about this in depth, but last week we discussed, if you remember, the farther you look into space, right? The farther you look into space, the more vast, the more intricate, the more design we see in the heavens, right? It's more detailed the farther we look. The same is true, so we're looking in that area through a telescope. The same is true when we look down through a microscope. When we look down into life at a microscopic level, we find that it is more detailed in design than we could ever imagine. A flagella, if I get this right, hopefully, and I know there's a scientist among us, I keep seeing him smiling, so maybe I'll get this right. A flagella is basically a bacteria or a bacterial organism. And I know there's debate on whether or not they believe bacteria is actually alive, whatever. It acts like an organism, so we'll treat it as such. Of course, we cannot see bacteria with the naked eye. They're very small. Think of it this way. A thimble of water that is cultured with bacteria contains about 8 billion single-celled bacteria. So they're very small. But with the aid of powerful microscopes, we can see detail and design of God's creative handiwork even in bacteria. In fact, check this slide out. Put it on the screen for you. So this, in this picture on the left there is a diagram of the flagella bacteria. It basically, as you can see, if you see a little piece of thing that looks like a grain of rice, and it's got some hairs coming out of it, that's the bacteria, right? Okay? And then they zoom in on it to show you the motor of that bacteria, what's known as the flagellar motor, which is a very simple yet complex mechanism that enables the bacteria to move. It's a lot like an outboard motor of a boat with a propeller, right? In fact, that propeller, which is a filament, they call it, but that looks like a propeller, can rotate 100,000 revolutions per minute. It's one of the most efficient machines that we know of in all of creation. This motor is water-cooled, and it enables the bacteria to move forward and backward. Now think about this. If any of those parts are missing in that motor that is at a microscopic level, remember there's 8 billion of these things in a thimble of cultured water. If any of those parts are not there, whether the universal joint or the hook, right? If that filament or propeller is not there, if the outer membrane or the bushing or the stator, if any of those things are not present in the bacteria does not function. It cannot be bacteria as we know it if you take away one of the parts. In fact, this led biochemist Michael Behe to coin a phrase which is known as irreducible complexity, meaning in order for life to exist, there is an irreducible complexity that we observe in creation, right? Life cannot exist without the complex design that it is made of. Think of it this way. And he uses this illustration, so I'll try to do it. So think of a mousetrap, okay? Think of the components of a mousetrap. You have the platform or the piece of wood that the mousetrap, right, in order to have a mousetrap. And then you have the spring mounted to the mousetrap. And then you have, I can't remember what the arm to hold it down is. I can't remember what it's called, but you have that little piece of metal that holds the spring down and the arm that comes over. And then you have the catch, right? If you take the platform away, if you take the spring away, if you take the catch away, the little arm that holds the spring, if you take any of that away, it no longer is a mousetrap, right? You can only reduce life so much, but there has to be complexity in order for it to be actual life. Life cannot arise out of simplicity. Life is complex and cannot evolve from inanimate matter without a designer. Then there's this one's fascinating, and I'm running out of time, and I'm going to have to go fast, but I'll put it up there real quick. Okay, look at the next slide. This is a fossil of what it's called the coelacanth. It's a fish that we find in the fossil record, okay? And it was thought that this particular coelacanth, because where they found the fossil, in the level, you're like, oh, this thing's about 65 million years ago, and it probably evolved around, 200 million years ago, but it died out 65 million years ago, along with the dinosaurs. However, in 1938, they found a coelacanth alive. And this is a picture of one, and they found it off the coast of South Africa, and you can still find them today. In fact, evolutionary theorists called this a living fossil, right? In fact, they used to think that this was one of the transitional forms of life because the front fins of the coelacanth are almost like arms, right? They're not like other fins that we find in other fish. There is muscle and bone that somewhat resembles maybe it's evolving into an arm. But we still see them in the same way in the fossil record. The anatomy of that fossil matches that fish that is still alive. In other words, this animal isn't millions of years old. It's only thousands. And then, if you go to the next slide, not only is there coelacanth, dinosaur artwork that we find in several civilizations. In other words, we find carvings, we find reliefs on rock, we find paintings, we find sculptures into buildings of these animals that look like dinosaurs, which seems to indicate that people had seen these animals and made these depictions. Then there is the circular reasoning of the fossil or dating fossils, the fossil dating. And real simple, it's simply this. Okay, if the lower part is the oldest and it gets younger the higher you go up, well, how do you date this low part? Well, you date it by what fossils are in it. So we know that it's this old because of the fossils. But then you go to another place and you say, well, we know this fossil is this old. How do you know it's that old? Well, it's because it's at that level. So in other words, in order to prove the date of the fossil, they use the level of the rock it's found. In order to prove the date of the rock, they look at the fossils. It's what we call tautology or circular reasoning. Yeah, they can't answer that. So, well, we have only scratched the surface of the evidence for intelligent design. And as always, like I did last week, I show you this stuff. And I show you the detail. I show you the evidence for intelligent design that the biblical record does match what we find in creation, right? And like I said, there is so much more that demonstrates that what we read on days 4 and 5 actually happened the way God said it did happen, right? And if you want to learn more, you can join us on Thursdays, as Joe mentioned earlier, in the fellowship hall at 6:30, and we're going to get more detail, talk more about this stuff. But for now, I want to talk about how God's creation of animals not only tell us something about Him, but how this knowledge leads us to trust Him, even in times of difficulty. In fact, put it another way, God's wisdom and glory in creation reminds us that He can be trusted. Now get this, especially when we suffer. We could say this about any aspect of creation, but I want to talk about God's creation of animals. From the beginning, the creatures God created were designed to be a display of His unfathomable wisdom and glory. Animals are majestic in so many ways. Whether it's the blue whale, which can weigh up to 300,000 pounds, or the cheetah that can run faster than 75 miles per hour. Animals are simply amazing creatures. I mean, consider how human beings are just fascinated by animals. I mean, we have zoos. I mean, when you stand next to an elephant or a rhinoceros or a giraffe, or you see the power of a gorilla or a polar bear, we're drawn and we're fascinated. We're like, wow. I mean, we watch, documentaries. If you remember the old show, I remember growing up, Wild Kingdom. Remember? Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom and all the animals. And, there's National Geographic. There's, Planet Earth or River Monsters. We're just fascinated by animals. Their size, their abilities, and instincts are just amazing to behold. Now, what does this do? What does this have to do with how we can trust God in the midst of suffering? It's simply this. The beauty and wisdom of God's creation, including the animals, reminds us that God is the creator. They focus our attention on the fact that there is no one else like Him. There is nothing He cannot do, and He is so wise that He always knows what He is doing, even when we do not understand it. In fact, I'll encourage you to turn to Psalm 77. I want to briefly look at Psalm 77 with you. Listen to what is written in Psalm 77. I want you to listen. This is Asaph, who wrote this psalm. Listen to where he's at in life. He's not in a good place. Verse 1, my voice rises to God, and I will cry aloud. My voice rises to God, and He will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. In the night, my hand was stretched out without weariness. My soul refused to be comforted. When I remember God, then I am disturbed. When I sigh, then my spirit grows faint. You have held my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of long ago. I remember my song in the night. I will meditate with my heart, and my spirit ponders. Will the Lord reject forever? And will He never be favorable again? Has His loving kindness ceased forever? Has His promise come to an end forever? Has God forgotten to be gracious, or has He in anger withdrawn His compassion? Then I said, it is my grief that the right hand of the Most High has changed. Do you see that? You see where the psalmist is he's suffering. He's going through difficulty. He's going through trials. And he's saying, God, where are you? Why is this happening? Why are you allowing me to endure this low time in my life? But as always, you see the psalmist is very honest and brutal about what he's going through. But look at what he says. Verse 11, I shall remember the deeds of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate on all your work and muse on your deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your strength among the peoples. You have, by your power, redeemed your people. Do you see how creation is intended to draw us to God, especially when we're at a low point? When people we love suffer, when we suffer, when we go through difficulty, and we ask ourselves, God, why? Why did my sister die? Why is my marriage struggling? Why is my son walked away? Why do I physically endure all the time this pain? And God says, look at who I am. I am the creator. I am the designer. Look at my wisdom and what I have made. And may that draw you to me and remind you that you can trust me. I know what I'm doing. I never make any mistakes. Look at the design that I have left for you to behold. You don't understand what I'm doing, but that's okay. I do. And he says, trust me. I still love you. I will still care for you. Even when you cannot see it, the Lord says, cling to him. Do you see that? We don't have time, but I'll just make reference of it. But Job 42 says the same thing. In the time of immense suffering, God is telling Job, look at all the animals. Look at what I've created. Those passages of Behemoth and Leviathan and all the other animals. God says the same thing. Look at the star. Look at that. He says, Job, you have no right to question me. I know what I'm doing. And at the end, Job says, wow, I had heard about you, but now I know you. How did he know him? It was through the path of suffering. He found God to be faithful, even in the dark times. And what God used to bring Job to that realization was creation. It's fascinating that God never answered Job. God never told Job, like, this is why you're going through suffering, because I was bragging about you to Satan and all this. He never did that. Maybe he found out later, if he's the one who wrote the book, but not before. You know what is sad is that the lost world misses the point of all of this. They think creatures came from nowhere and no one. And the very thing that God has created for his people to have comfort in, they do not have. We who have been redeemed not only know better by God's grace, but we benefit from this knowledge. We can look at creation and be reminded of the greatness of our God, knowing that he is all wise, all knowing, all powerful, and he can do anything he wants. And if he chooses to send us suffering, it's because he has a purpose in it. He always has a purpose. This is the God we want to make known to the world who needs him and is desperate for him. We say, as the psalmist did in Psalm 8, as we look at creation, O Yahweh our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Amen. So, In summary, we simply see that the scriptures are very clear that God created all of the known universe out of nothing in a matter of days, and what we find in the animal kingdom confirms it. Amen? Are there any questions? We got one. Let's put it up there. Why do some footnotes in the Bible call behemoth as a hippo and leviathan as an alligator? Because they're trying to tell you that some people identify that animal as something else. And there are Christians who, they tend to be theistic evolutionists who don't want to admit what the biblical record is and say that there is some truth to evolutionary theory, and so they try to change the names of the animals. But even Leviathan as an alligator, you read Leviathan and large, we can catch an alligator. They're large, they're scary, but we can catch them. We can. You can't catch this Leviathan, whatever it was. Was it the plesiosaur, the plesiosaur, or other aquatic dinosaur? But that's why they do that. They're basically telling you that there are other interpretations of what this word means. But again, when you look at the description, think about this. God is trying to impress upon Job, man, just check out this magnificent animal. Look at the hippo. It's like, well, why wouldn't you just have him look at an elephant? An elephant's bigger than a hippo. You know what I mean? So it doesn't seem to fit the context. But that's why you see it in the footnotes. By the way, footnotes, not always true. I don't think that one's true either. So as the team comes forward, as we get ready for a time of communion, here's what I want to direct our attention towards as we remember Jesus at the table. The Bible says that we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. But like us, he is able to sympathize with everything we go through, because he was tempted in every way we are, yet without sin. The God who is not only our judge, is also our Savior. The God who is so transcendent, he is so other than us, became one of us, and he understands us at our level. And that's Jesus. So as we come before the table, we want to remember how good and gracious Jesus is in the gospel. Father, thank you for what we briefly learned and covered today. I pray you would use it for your glory and in our lives. As we come before the Lord's table to remember his sacrifice on our behalf, lead us and guide us in the truth. We ask in your name. Amen.